So what is it? What is the status quo of the international UFO research?
The field is fractured between the people who are waiting for the government to disclose. You know, the word disclosure is a word that is used, you know, overused in the US by people who are still waiting for the government to tell the truth. Well, a government doesn't have to tell the truth. A government has to manage, you know, the operations of the country. And in this field, there are many areas that have never been really known. And one example, you know, in our book is an example of that, because the government kept the secret, and the witnesses kept the secret. So we're in an area where, you know, PARLA and I have been interested in what the witnesses were saying and what they were seeing. Many people, especially in the US today, are waiting for the government to disclose something. And those are two completely different things. From my point of view, I'm interested in speaking to the people who actually saw something. Okay. I know what it means because when I was young, as you may know, I saw an object I could not identify with two other witnesses, including one with binoculars. So I know what it's like to be confronted with the phenomenon. Right. And those are the people I want to talk to because they have the information. The government is on the other side. It has a legitimate interest in gathering data and in some cases in keeping it secret because the witnesses may have seen some. I remember in the files of the Air Force, US Air Force, you know, I spent 4 years going through the entire files of Project Blue Book. There is a case which is classified, and there are very few cases that are classified, but there is one. And I asked Dr. Hynek, you know, what that case was about, because it seemed very interesting. All I knew was that it was in Alaska, and we didn't have many cases in Alaska. Yep. And I was very interested in it. And
can I interrupt you for a second so I do a concise translation from Massimo? Just 1 second. Il governo di fatto si occupa di ufologia, o meglio del fenomeno UFO, Massimo, perché ha bisogno di avere il controllo della situazione dai punti di vista che riguardano le questioni di governo. Sì. Non si interessa di altro che questo. Quindi tutta l'attesa che c'è per le famose rivelazioni o del Pentagono o del governo è un po' malmessa, un po' mal riposta, perché lui dice il governo fa il suo lavoro, tutti gli altri che sono in cerca delle risposte fanno invece il loro lavoro. Lui è nel mezzo perché dal punto di vista della scienza, a parte il fatto di avere avuto lui stesso quando era molto giovane un'esperienza di avvistamento UFO che lo convinse che la cosa era piuttosto importante, l'ha mosso in questo senso.
15 anni a Parigi, 15 anni, sì.
Quindi da quel momento in poi la sua ricerca da un punto di vista scientifico ha detto ok, dove stanno i casi importanti? E siccome per 4 anni ha avuto la possibilità di investigare, o meglio di leggere tutti quanti i file del Project Blue Book, a un certo punto lui ad Hynek ha detto quali sono quelli che sono un po' dubbi, che non ci fanno vedere, e in effetti capisce che il mantenimento della segretezza è necessario dal punto di vista del governo. È esattamente la posizione di Corso. Te lo ricordi, Paola?
Come no?
Secrecy. Colonel Corso used to say that secrecy was, let's say, disputable or despicable, actually, but necessary.
Well,
that was his statement.
In this particular case in Alaska, when I found out what the case was, it was a woman in Alaska had seen a light in the evening that was moving west over Alaska. Well, west of Alaska is the Sakhalin Peninsula and the USSR, in those days, the Soviet Union. Okay. Do you want to translate as we go?
Sì, uno dei casi che restava segretato, Massimo, è un caso che lui ha studiato che riguardava l'Alaska, in una regione praticamente di mare che costeggiava, cioè che era praticamente territorio sovietico, russo. Okay.
So, what she saw was just a light. This was in the evening, so the ground was dark, but the sky was still, the sun was still illuminating this object. And this was classified, and there was an explanation with it that said unidentified. In other words, the Air Force could not tell what it was.
All right.
And those, of course, are the UFOs, the true UFOs.
Mm-hmm. Il caso in questione era quello di una signora che ha visto sfrecciare questo oggetto, il caso era classificato e ovviamente se era classificato vuol dire che era classificato come unidentified, non identificato, e quindi lo sappiamo. All right.
So when I found out what the real explanation, Dr. Hynek told me that what she had seen, it was not unidentified. The Air Force knew exactly what it was. It was a U-2 spy plane that had been caught just when the sun was right to reflect from the plane, and it was a spy plane that was going into Siberia.
E invece, E invece si trattava, quando lui si è confrontato con Hynek, di una spiegazione più convenzionale. Era un aerospia U-2 degli americani che era andato oltre, chiaramente aveva sconfinato, e a quel punto è per questo che è stato classificato e quindi era sottoposto a segretezza. But in fact, can I ask you something? In fact, we have this divergent situation, unidentified from one side in terms of totally unknown to the Americans or the Russians or the Chinese, even the Italians and the Romans, and or the others, which are identified, but stately they appear to the public as they know what they are.
And this book is about a case like this, where the government has kept the data secret. We don't know where the craft, the vehicle, we don't know where it went. It was taken away and there was no trace. There is no report.
Can we assume where eventually was the very, let's say, traditional location where these unknown objects and or unidentified airplanes from of foreign countries were transported and secured?
Well, in the book, I talk about the time when Dr. Hynek and I were invited by the Air Force to the base in Ohio with the Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force. The Foreign Technology Division is an intelligence operation where when you walk into the lobby, into the first room in the building, you see an airplane hanging from the ceiling, but the airplane is a Russian MiG.
Okay.
So you can see this is what they do in that building. They are not interested in American airplanes. They're interested in foreign technology.
Right.
The Foreign Technology Division had the responsibility for Project Blue Book. So the question is, where would the information go? Well, the public information, for a long time went to the Air Force, and but if some actual material is recovered, it might go to the Air Force, but the Air Force would give it to a laboratory or a company like Lockheed, IBM, SAIC, Boeing, or laboratories that have the capability and have the scientists, or Battelle. Battelle Memorial Institute in Ohio was very close to the Air Force.
And actually, these premises actually were full of scientists and engineers, and the way of reproducing the characteristics of these foreign objects was called, as we know, back engineering.
Yes.
All right. Do they ever accomplish anything interesting, according to your knowledge, in terms of reproducing very foreign technology, meaning alien technology?
Well, first, when I speak to scientists who are close to that kind of research, they say that reverse engineering doesn't always work. In fact, it works less than half the time, because it's, if you... suppose we find suppose we, in Roman times, Julius Caesar finds a garage door opener, or he finds a device like this, what is the reverse engineering of something like this? You find structures in it that you don't recognize. There are metals that you don't recognize. There are transistors that are, pure element with impurities in it, and somebody deliberately put the impurities. So if you have a device to open your garage, but you don't have a garage, you don't know what a garage is, how can you reverse engineer it? You only have half of it. And right. I've occasionally spoken to people who had recovered a MiG, a Russian fighter. They told me that there were instruments in the MiG that had never been really understood. And they may have a simple function, but if you don't make the link to the function, you don't, you can analyze it for years, but you don't really know what it is.
Right.
Okay, do you want to translate for Massimo?
Sì, Massimo, qui stiamo parlando dell'importanza della retroingegneria.
Sì, c'ho il traduttore, Maurizio, non ti preoccupare, già ho capito.
Ah, va benissimo.
Ascolta, ragazzi, potete prendere questi spezzoni e li potete usare, lo sapete?
Sì.
Perché io so che lui non parla di queste cose, quello di cui ha parlato adesso è molto importante, è un tesoro, dovete prendere dei spezzoni e usarli in qualche maniera.
Secondo me si potrà, Massimo potrà fare un montaggio di questo materiale. Certo. A un certo punto potrebbe diventare, al di là del documentario da presentare ad altri, più che altro sarà dire che alcune delle cose che sa Jacques Vallée e che vorrà raccontare in prima persona. Teoricamente dovremmo riuscire a fare il botto dal punto di vista anche della stampa. Dico, le agenzie, l'ANSA, come faranno a capire?
Parole, usali, Dio mio, perché io non l'ho sentito mai parlare di questo. Lui generalmente non parla della retroingegneria. Jacques, can we go to You started with the book, and that Maurizio asked you where it went. Well, Maurizio, it crashed near ground zero, so you're not going to take it to Wright-Patterson, okay? It was near ground zero.
Now let's stop for a second of the time lapse between 1945 and 1947. In those 2 years, everything happened in the United States as far as, you know, the gigantic development of the industries and so far and so on, because of the, let's say, America won the Second World War, okay? So at that point, they ensured a situation from one standpoint that industrially and financially, America, United States, and Russia were at that point forced to confront themselves between, let's say, there were two opposing gigantic parties, and then we had the so-called Cold War.
Yes.
But in 1945, the situation was slightly different. It seems that if an object of foreign origin, very unfortunately for them, crashed in very close to Trinity site, was because of the fear of the nuclear proliferation.
It seems, and you know, PARLA and I have discussed it, of course, often. What is most relevant, most important about the case is that it happened at the time of the capitulation of Japan. It happened, and most American men were still in uniform. The war had not really ended yet. They had not been demobilized and sent back to their families. So this was obviously, I mean, it's obvious that that observation was a message, that it was a communication and it was treated as a communication, as we know from some of the scientists who have spoken about it. It was a response to the historic, development of the first atomic bomb, and history changed at that point. World history changed during those few weeks, and then this object comes down from the sky and crash lands, or lands in this, on this property in New Mexico, and it's taken away. So part of your question is, where is it now?
Yeah,
because the object was intact. It was not like an airplane that breaks into parts. It was pretty much intact, except for one panel, one opening.
Yes.
And it was removed and we have, the access to the witnesses who saw the entire operation because they were there, at the time. So we have to, but the case is not in Project Blue Book. I've gone through, 12,000 cases in Project Blue Book over 4 years with my wife, who was a psychologist, and a number of friends who were scientists. This case is nowhere. It's not there. It's not recorded anywhere. Well, why doesn't the Air Force have a record of it? The Air Force doesn't have a record of it because it went to the atomic research laboratories who are in the US government. Right. There are 3 different types of secrecy. It's not just that, there is something is secret, and if you have a clearance, you can know the secret. That doesn't work that way. First, if you have a clearance, that's not enough for you to be told about a secret. You have to have the need to know.
Right.
And for example, Dr. Hynek had a clearance at the Air Force, so he could read the documents and so on. But there were many things that he could not read because he did not have the need to know.
The need to know, right.
And that was a great frustration for him, because most of the problem was in a classified area that he did not have access to. And of course, I never had access to it. The ordinary secrets of the government go through the different agencies, and they go to the office of the president. Except the diplomatic secrets go to the State Department, they go to the diplomats. They don't go directly to the president unless there is a need for the president to pay attention to it.
Right.
For example, what's going on now between Israel and the Palestinians, I'm sure there are many secrets. Those secrets would go to, the diplomatic corps, but then it would be reported to the president, because it's a developing situation now, and the president needs to know it. But normally, many of those diplomatic foreign relation secrets don't go directly to the president. And then there is a third type of classification, which is called the R secrets, R, P, and Q clearances, that are only for the atomic science, for the nuclear, the nuclear secrets.
I remember
those are compartmented.
I remember that I don't recall if Townsend Brown was Canadian. Was he?
I don't think he was Canadian. You are thinking of Wilbert Smith.
Yes,
correct.
Wilbert Smith in Canada.
Yeah.
Had started a study, had an official government study on UFOs, and he was interviewed by some journalists, and they asked him about the classification,
right.
And they asked if it was classified like the atom bomb, which was the highest level, as PARLA said, and he said no. Gentlemen, it's classified much higher than the atom bomb.
Okay.
That tells you that this is not going to be disclosed at any time.
I agree totally with you.
Okay, it's just too important, that aspect of it. And by the way, I have no problem with that personally. I think there are some things that where we have to trust, whether we like it or not, we have to trust the people at that level to preserve the secrecy. However, this is 70 years, 75 years later. Why continue to keep it secret? Yeah. And my point is, we should turn it over to the scientific community, because in the way the secrecy works is that, well, suppose that somebody finds something like this and they want to reverse engineer it. Mm-hmm. They would say, well, there is some plastic here. So we'll take out the plastic, okay, and we'll give it to a plastic contractor who has the right secrets, and they will analyze the plastic. Then we find a screen here that has many levels. So we're going to give it to a glass company that understands how this glass is manufactured, but we're not going to tell them about the plastic. And then, so we remove the screen and we remove the plastic. And now we have a board, an electronic board, several electronic boards with transistors and, circuits, and so on. Mm-hmm. So we're going to remove those and give them to IBM. We'll give them to Intel. We'll give them to people like that who understand, who can analyze technology at that level, at that precision. Okay, those are at different scales. They use different skills, different scientists. The problem is they will give you some answers, but how do you put it together? Suppose that now the object that when we speak to Senor Padilla in New Mexico, he remembers very clearly. He has an amazing memory, and he can tell us what the object looked like. The object was not a flying saucer. There are no flying saucers in our book. Okay, all the objects that we described were oval objects or were like eggs. Okay, this was a large object, and when they went inside, remember, three witnesses went actually inside the object.
Wait a minute, Jacques, let him tell Massimo this much, that it wasn't a flying saucer and that it was an oval-shaped object. And go ahead, Maurizio.
È molto semplice per quanto riguarda la forma dell'oggetto. I testimoni, quando hanno visto, sono addirittura entrati, in tre sono entrati dentro l'oggetto. L'oggetto era di forma ovoidale. Non c'è in tutto quanto il libro nulla che riporti ai cosiddetti classici dischi volanti, non ci sono dischi volanti. Questo è un oggetto ovoidale, praticamente tutto d'un pezzo, sì, un uovo, che fra l'altro aveva evidentemente subito un danno, no? C'era un gash, come si chiama? Un'apertura, però era praticamente intatto. Infatti lui nella risposta precedente, prima, ha detto: ma un oggetto intatto, ma dove viene portato? E lui non lo sa questo.
No, pensiamo che è stato portato a ground zero. La cosa è questo che devi capire.
Ground zero
era a 20 chilometri da dove è caduto, dove la bomba è esplosa.
Cioè a 20 chilometri. Sì.
Ma dovete capire una cosa, l'oggetto era lo stesso forma della cosa della bomba atomica, lo stesso forma, allora è un messaggio chiaro.
I want to remind Paola and to tell you, Jacques, that I went visit Mr. Remy Baca with my boss, John Rayo of Open Minds. We spent half of a day at his home in Seattle, and it was an amazing encounter, in fact, because of the sincerity of that guy. He was equally clear-minded, such as Mr. Padilla. And if something comes to your mind so many years so clearly, I believe there was no chance. I did believe there was no chance that he was lying.
Oh, no,
not at all.
And we can prove it now because Paola found the third witness who could reconstruct exactly what had happened, because she was, Sabrina Padilla came several years later and could reconstruct what had happened, including some things that Baca and Padilla didn't know about what was recovered later, the samples. But, the important thing is that when Remy Baca and Jose Padilla saw the object, they measured it. Those were very smart kids. And remember, this was a war, so all the adults were in uniform. And the kids were driving the truck. The kids were taking care of the cattle. The kids had real responsibilities. So they knew that they should measure this object. They measured it between 6 or 7 meters, and Jose went inside. Now the object was something like 5 meters high, about 4 meters where there was a floor that was flat, and he walked there and he found a bracket that was on the wall that he took, and so on, that we have. But the question is, for me, is what was under the floor. So when the soldiers took away the object, they had to put it on the side, put this egg on the side, because otherwise it would hit the bridge, on the expressway, on the freeway, so on the road. So they could see the underside. Well, the propulsion system, again, this is a scientist in me, the engineer wants to know what was under the floor, because there was no propellers, there was no reactors, how did this object work? So there was about 1 meter under the floor where all the propulsion system must have been. If it was, if it had the propulsion on board, which, we assume it was controlled from within the object itself. What kind of physics would enable that? And we don't have anything like this. We still launch. We're making these big rockets, bigger and bigger and bigger. SpaceX and the Russians still have their amazing, huge rocket that they had for many years, which is extremely reliable. But those are very crude technologies. They have been refined, and they work reasonably well. But we know that UFOs master space and time in ways that we don't understand. So come back to the secret projects. If we are still launching rockets and investing in this essentially obsolete technology, that means that the reverse engineering doesn't work.
Failed.
And that's what people need to understand.
You mean that actually? Well, we have a double theory here, meaning that, for instance, you have a technician, an engineer, and a big scientist whose IQ level could be very, very high, but it seems that there is a direct connection between the physical object the object has a real physical connection to the occupants, to the members of the crew. Therefore, according to some witnesses, if you put somebody in front of a panel with the machines and you are
I know where you're going.
Simulating.
I know where you're going.
Simulating the way of connecting yourself with the machine. The machine doesn't work. But if you put a little small stupid alien like this, whose brains is 45,000 times smarter and sharper than ours, the machine connects with the little guy and it works.
That's one hypothesis.
It is just theoretical, I agree.
As you know, there have been many experiments, including, especially by the Air Force, on a jet fighter pilot has, both of his feet are busy, both of his hands are busy, and he still needs to connect to give instructions to weapon systems and to other things. Right. There has been a lot of work on how the plane, the airplane can pick up specific thoughts from the pilot to activate certain devices. And much of that, is not secret anymore. Since, for 30 years, that some of that research has been public. When I worked at SRI, at Stanford Research Institute, there were people working on that kind of thing, and it was not secret. It was open. How can you control a device with your brainwaves, which is, and I've tried it, and to some extent you can train yourself to do that, to focus your thought in a sort of subliminal way, on getting, there are video games that were developed from that. Can you control a point, move it around the screen just by asking the spot to move without touching anything, okay? And those were research by computer companies. If you could control something on a screen while you're doing something else physically, your brain could control the input and the output from the screen. That's true. That works. It takes some training, but pretty much anybody can be trained to do that.
You are pointing out you're making a very important point, that the solution of the UFO not the phenomenon, but the secrecy, and so far so on, is scientific. Given the fact that if you try to find the solution from a military standpoint is erroneous, it's a big mistake, and nevertheless the same happens and applies to the politicians, because for about let's say 15 years, this gigantic movement of the so-called new ufology called exopolitics, which I believe was a very interesting effort to try to develop a different consciousness within the areas of the politic areas, and by the same token also for the people, the normal people. It was interesting, but it never worked. And right now, we know that secrecy is still secret, and what they are going to give us sooner or later, very soon apparently, is just little, crunches.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Let me stop for 1 minute so that Jacques understands. Maurizio, how many years were you in Phoenix?
3 years in Phoenix.
He was working in the same office with Alejandro Rojas, who has completely bashed us and this case.
Right.
Alejandro was my webmaster. He worked with Maurizio. He did not help Maurizio at all. Of course, Alejandro just went and said that Remy Baca was a liar and wanted money, and he was on Twitter, and before the book even came out.
Right.
Maurizio went to Washington State with the owner of Open Minds to buy the bracket.
Right. $15,000 he offered to Remy Baca, and he Remy very politely refused that offer.
So Maurizio, when you meet him and when you talk about this case, has firsthand information because he met one of the witnesses. He met Remy Baca.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And he's already told you he thinks he was telling the truth.
He was telling the truth. Unfortunately, he had a wife that decided to let's say, his house, his home was full of little statues, with the snow inside when you turn the little things. She was a compulsive collector of these little things all over the house. So we went there, and I tried to make a real interview, and the wife instead was going like, well, la, 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 la. In fact, as Don Rayo used to say, she was in La La Land, and instead Remy Baca was very grounded. This is the difference.
But Maurizio, the piece that you tried to buy is with Jacques right now.
I know the piece is amazing. I believe it's amazing because I held it in my hands. And it made me feel that it was really special because too light, too consistent, and I don't know. I hope that sooner or later we're gonna make a final point regarding the nature of this object.
Well, there are a number of scientists here now in Silicon Valley who are looking at it.
Okay.
This is, I recognize that it is unique, even though it looks like an industrial object. But I'm not a metallurgist, so I have called several people to help look at it and to help analyze it, and we're doing that now.
Okay, nothing to be to compare with the Yuba Tuba stuff that you had in your hands for a little time.
No, and we are going to reanalyze the Yuba Tuba thing. One hypothesis is that it could be from a military device, because the military uses very, very refined magnesium. in missiles to destroy. If the missile is lost somewhere, you can explode the missile, and the magnesium will destroy the secret part, which is the electronics. Right. So the purpose of the magnesium in those rockets is to destroy the electronics so that nobody can pick it up and reverse engineer the guidance system, which is really the most important part of the missile.
I agree that the guidance systems also of the UFOs is still a gigantic mystery. And going back to the subject of the scientists who are sincerely open to, let's say, their point is we have to try to find out how these machines work. That means that the machines are somewhere. Now, if the government and the Pentagon are saying, hey guys, hey, world, we are going to tell you the truth about ufology. What part of ufology you are going to talk about it? This is my question.
Yes.
Which part?
People have told me, why do you study this case with PARLA? Because you'll never have the level of clearances to know what really happened. And that's true. I don't know where. We would like to know where the object was taken. We'd like to know who are the scientists who work with it now. We'd like to talk to them. We'd like to, but I don't have access to that. But we have access to the witnesses. You met Remy Baca. I've had the chance, thanks to PARLA, to meet with Mr. Padilla. To some extent, we've become very close. We've become friends because we share, a big mystery that, I'm passionate about it. PARLA is passionate about it. And the witness, it changed his life, his entire life. So we don't need access to the secrets. We have the people who are there. The scientists who work on it now, in the basement of Lockheed or Battelle or IBM, they were not there. They have to learn. They may have to learn from this book, what really happened, because the witnesses didn't talk. And there is this one thing that I had never realized before, is that in many cases, the witnesses are not telling you what happened. They are telling you what they think you want to hear. If a colonel from the Air Force arrives, with his uniform and so on, and comes to your kitchen and start asking you about what you've seen, there are things you may not, even though you're a good citizen and you respect the government, you respect the military, but there are things you're not going to tell him. For example, the witnesses, when they were watching this object and the vegetation was burning, the object was open, they could see these little creatures, they could hear the creatures sort of crying like a rabbit that's being killed, or they were obviously in distress, in pain. They had images in their mind. There was a communication of some sort with these beings that was intense, that made a deep impression to them. They are still talking about that now, but that would not come out in an interview with an Air Force officer. I mean, those are the things that are very private to you, that you would only tell to someone you trust. Okay. And what the wonderful work that PARLA has done 4 years before I became involved was to obviously gain their trust at a deep human level.
The lady, the Padilla lady, also saw the creatures?
No.
No.
What was her involvement?
Only the two kids, the two little boys.
Her involvement was that she was adopted by Jose's father and mother, so that she could tell us. We thought there was only one piece of that memory metal. She saw 4 and 5 strips of the memory metal in the house, plus in plastic bags, the fiber optics that she said would bite her hands. So when the craft, this is of interest to a NASA scientist, that 10 pounds of fiber optic fell out and lit up. And they did their Christmas trees with them. They put them on the Christmas trees because they were lit up. I mean, that's incredible. And then the memory metal, she played with it and it would curl up and go back to its form. Well, Jose didn't know any of that because they only found one square with which they fixed the windmill. One square is what they found. He didn't know that his father obviously went back and got other stuff. She was living in the house. So how did the father have that in the house? He must have gone with his horse back and found other stuff he never told his son. So we have separate stories from separate people about the same stuff.
Okay, how come that, as far as I know, the Roswell field, I'm talking about the ranch, the Foster Ranch, was the terrain, actually the land was totally checked by hundreds of,
and they couldn't find anything.
Now, in fact, because they cleaned everything. Instead, in this case, 2 years later, the cleanup situation...
2 years before.
The cleanup operation wasn't so thorough, wasn't so good.
It was a mess, because who went to clean up that crash was 23-year-old boys that were part of the Manhattan Project. Yeah. They were playing country western music on their Jeeps, and they didn't even want to pick up the stuff. They had never seen anything like this.
All right.
They didn't think it was important because the officers said it was a weather balloon. It was a 10-ton weather balloon. So what's important about picking up a weather balloon? There was just so much stuff that they just buried some of it to get rid of it, rather than picking up every little piece. They did not wear special suits. Mm-hmm. It was just, the 10 or 20 kids essentially were sent there with a Jeep to gather the stuff and take it out.
And the boys the two boys watched for un momento Massimo, che poi li puoi fare delle domande. Sì. The two boys watched the recovery for almost 8 days, but understand another thing, because Maurizio, as soon as I get this all translated, it's almost translated, I'm going to give it to you and Massimo. Okay. Ho tradotto il libro già. Padilla family, who was ranchers, had weather balloons they returned to the government. So they knew it wasn't a weather balloon. They picked them up.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a main difference with Roswell. See, okay, go ahead.
So they're talking about your contribution, because you're the one that mentioned that there is a deception with the UFO phenomenon, with messengers of deception, and then you went on to suggest certain things in Passport to Magonia.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, yeah. Can you explain your theory, if this theory conflicts in a way with the fact that we do have right now an investigation, which is definitely something that occurred many years ago, but which is very consistent to the physical evidence of the phenomenon?
Well, I think the solution, if we try to think about where the solution to the problem could come from, okay, it's not going to come from people looking at little pieces of things, in secrecy. Because what the phenomenon is really trying to tell us, and we have not been listening to the message, but the phenomenon is trying to tell us that there is another level of reality.
Okay, aspetta un momento. I mean, wait a minute. Translate for Massimo.
Massimo, la realtà del fenomeno è che non dobbiamo stare attaccati al discorso dei pezzi o di quant'altro, ma si ricollega con la tua domanda di prima, ma che c'è un altro livello del fenomeno.
Un altro livello.
Un altro livello.
Di realtà.
Di realtà. Andiamo avanti.
Questo lo devi mettere come un pronunziamento sul locandina. Il fenomeno ci sta insegnando che c'è un altro livello di realtà.
Okay. Il fenomeno vuol dire che proprio fisicamente, perché esiste il fenomeno UFO? Questa è la teoria che lui ha sviluppato negli anni passati. Perché esiste il fenomeno UFO? Per dirci che esiste un altro livello di realtà.
Un altro livello di consapevolezza. Consapevolezza, vai, vai, go.
So that idea is not controversial in modern science. This is what modern physics is telling us, that time and space are negotiable. It started with Einstein saying, time is relative, relativity of time, relativity of space. But today, my friends and colleagues in science are telling me that when you look at quantum phenomena, at quantum physics, you find that time and space are really secondary aspects, secondary factors of quantum reality. Now, we are going to discover another level of physics, and this is always how science works. You get to observe phenomena that are contradictions between different theories. There are contradictions between quantum mechanics and relativity. This is not controversial in science. Scientists agree with that. It's true. It was a hypothesis 20 years ago. Today, it's not a hypothesis. This is something that we've started to teach in universities like Stanford and MIT or Harvard. In order to resolve the contradictions, you have to go up a level. Science is like a tree where you go to the end of the branch and you cannot go any further. You have to come back to the trunk and you have to go up, and then you find another way of resolving the phenomena of nature. Now, that's true with nature, but it's also true with certain phenomena. It's true with parapsychology. It's true with survival of death. Beyond where does the information go when we die? Okay, the information shouldn't be destroyed in the whole information universe. So there is another way of thinking about all these problems in terms of the structure of information, and that's where I can make a contribution, because really my interest is in information science. Okay, the UFO phenomenon is a treasure in giving us an opportunity to look at an alternative level of reality. And what we need to do is not so much try to make new weapons, or new propulsion systems. Yes, we would like a better propulsion system than just a big rocket, but that's much more important to our history, especially at this time in history where, the survival of the Earth is a question in terms of the environment. This is a treasure because it gives us a chance to look at another way of thinking about the universe. And that's where we should be looking for, information about UFOs. And this may be the message that, this object was bringing, 2 days after the capitulation of Japan.
I agree.
I mean, think of the moment in history. Okay.
Guarda, quello che ha detto adesso è un tesoro, io non l'ho mai sentito.
È molto importante, ma tanto
molto importante, Maurizio.
Ne parliamo, tanto ci vediamo presto.
Devi trascrivere quello che ha detto, non ho mai sentito parlare così.
Assolutamente.
Devi trascrivere tutto. Guarda, abbiamo 10 minuti.
Lo so, è importante, Paola. Io voglio fare un'altra domanda. Jacques,
abbiamo 10 minuti.
I made an interview very recently with a very important lady. She's an astrophysicist, Italian astrophysicist, who she was given the cover story of Time magazine in England some time ago. Her name is Sandra Savaglio. In one of the topics that we discussed, I told her, "Hey, Sandra, please tell me, what is the biggest mystery that you want to, discover? What the real answer that you want to get from your question?" And she goes like, "Well, I want to know two things. First, how life began on Earth and how consciousness works." And this is exactly the topic that we are talking about right now.
Yes.
Okay. Volevo chiedere su una cosa sola, poi mi risponde sinteticamente. Se durante le riprese del film Incontri avvicinati al terzo tipo ci sono stati avvistamenti UFO. Io da quello che so Steven Spielberg lo ha confermato, non so se lui lo sa.
Jacques,
questa è tutta roba
tanto lo risponde very
brevemente.
Can you tell Massimo if it's true that during the shooting of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind some sightings, UFO sightings occurred?
I have no reliable information about that. I've heard the story, but I don't know I have not been able to verify it.
Okay.